So welcome. We're here with Kris Bjorke from InnerServe. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you.
Welcome
Good
to
be
my
here.
office. We're going to talk a little bit about self-differentiating and specifically unpacking some ideas in Friedman book here. But before we start that, Kris, you have an interesting job. Kris and I have known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember a conversation with you when you were doing youth ministry, and I was in a congregation as well. And you really felt this call to follow that we had a need for this thing in ministry, and pretty soon you were leading it, and now here we are a dozen years later. So talk about that story, and then I want to ask you some questions.
Well, I do remember it distinctly because we were walking around a church during a break of another meeting, and I kept talking about this thing about ministry, like I just want to help congregations in between, like when they're trying to figure out what they want to do and that. So I have a business partner, Sue Magrin, and I came together. We both had a similar idea and came at it at a different way, and started InnerServe 11 years ago with the idea of helping out congregations. So we thought we were going to just kind of be playing games, teaching confirmation here and there, but it's become this whole different thing about systems, about how we set systems up within the church context so that staff people can succeed when they come in. And so we've been doing that. We have 10 associates and have worked in over 100 churches in the area.
There's so many things that I'm curious about. But here's a couple that I'll put up two of them and then take them or whatever order you want. Number one is, what's so interesting to me is you go in not as the lead, right? We've had, at least in our area here, and at that time too, we had people doing intentional pastoral ministry, right? But not in this area. So you go into a system, leading in transition within the system. So I'd love to talk about how did this go from we're helping this to kind of we really have to have a systems approach. And then secondly, you have really, as I've watched you navigate this time, you've really said, here's kind of who I am, and it could have different packages around that, but how do you stay with following what God's calling Kris to do, and the gifts, and more even importantly, the gifts you have, and the things that bring you life, as you're in all these different systems, as you're starting a new business ministry, as you're not sure what that looks like. I mean, talk about how did you kind of help navigate Kris's call in this while you're also that, and maybe that's changed even over the time.
I think it has changed over time. I think one of the things I knew immediately is I knew I couldn't start a ministry like this by myself. I need somebody that keeps me in balance, keeps me motivated, and that's what I would say Sue and I do for each other. And then as we've grown and added people, that has helped as well. We just sort of spur each other on, because I know myself well enough to know that if I'm doing it all by myself, I'll start really strong and then I'll kind of peter out. So I needed somebody to help me keep going. So I knew initially I needed a partner, and I had actually talked to somebody other than Sue prior to it to see if they would consider leading this kind of ministry with me, and they said no. So it was all good in the long run. And so I did know that, and I think what keeps us grounded is not only that we have each other as a team, but that we share a common experience, and it looks different in each context, but we come together to say, because we're short term, what are the things that we're encountering, and how do we stay healthy in it? And we call each other out and say, you're way too far in, you need to step back, you need to pull back, and really take a look. And I think that's been helpful as we've kind of dealt with that together.
So do the associates, now that you have more than just you and Sue, how does that fit? Have you multiplied that among other people, or is it just still you and Sue kind of doing that for each other?
We do that for each other, but we also do that as a team too. So we do some system stuff. We send all of our people through the interim ministry training, and we want to take a little bit of credit for actually changing the name. It used to be interim pastor training, and now it's interim ministry training. Recognizing that there are people who do interim ministry at all different levels, at the judicatory level too. So So I think when you asked about the congregational context, I think that is really, I think a pastor that would allow the gate to open to have us in is somebody who already recognizes that they can't do it on their own, and I think that's a huge piece. So there's already comes with an openness, and sometimes it's a little bit more than they bargained for, but we try. We try to, like, everything is move at a speed of change that people can handle. So we don't just
give an example of a congregation that maybe has had a full-time youth person or children's person, and you come in. Tell us a little bit about what you do, like youth ministry, children's ministry-wise, but also what kind of change stuff are you working, or system stuff are you working?
Well, when we come in, we spend easily the first couple months really just trying to figure out all the moving pieces and what pieces we're in charge of. And so that does take a little bit of time.
I like the last part. And the parts we're in charge of?
Because sometimes you have extraordinary volunteers that take on the stuff, and and although it's on your list, they're really doing it, and you're in the background supporting them. And then there's that we actually have to do First Communion, and it starts next week, and how are we going to do that? So it's sort of navigating how, to what extent are people involved? Are there people involved that are maybe overly involved, or people that are under involved? And then I think you come with a sense of vulnerability to say, I can't do this on my own. The people. And so I lean pretty heavily on other people within the congregational context to tell me, okay, who should we ask? We need some people that will mentor confirmation students. Who do you think would be good at that when we think about the skills that we need? That kind of thing.
And I wonder if some of that is a gift of being the interim and the new person.
Yes.
Right? Maybe the Joey, whoever was there before, did that in the first year, but they've been there 10 years now, and I think, they're paying attention, and everybody else just kind of stepped back or whatever. So that's kind of interesting. And I love the way that you said, we're new here, stuff. And so I hear you say one of your roles is to not only create space, but invite people to say, bring your wisdom.
Yes.
Talk to us. So how does that transpire over time?
I think it just, over more and more time, we've become more reliant. So we spend the first couple months kind of figuring out what we're in charge of and to what extent, what kind of team we're dealing with. And then once we kind of land somewhere around the 3 or 4 months, we kind of say, okay, let's take a step back now and let's look at where have you been and what were the things, because a lot of times we have, if it's a real transition after a long tenure of somebody, it's like, well, you don't do it like so-and-so did it. And like, oh, yeah, I know, that's got to be hard, tell me about that. Or what parts did you appreciate about them that you don't have right now? And that kind of thing, to really be listening. Sometimes it's all about helping people just get past the person that was before you. And that's okay, too. So you sort of have to adjust your expectation to kind of what situation you find yourself in.
I appreciate what you just said. One of the things that Friedman talks about, we were just talking about, is be emotional, attending to the emotionality of what's going on. And I think especially as you think of long-term leaders that have left and what it is. For me, I always think on 2 levels. One is there's just this sense of they haven't practiced change. Right? And so change is scary. Like anything that we haven't done or haven't done for a long time can be scary. But also the sense of whether they loved everything about that person or not, there's grief. Or there's that piece. So how much are you, how do you navigate that? How do you say, all right, this is really about the work that we have to do, and this is really about some of the feelings that are going on, the anxiety or what. I mean, have you learned across systems some things are pretty common to look at? How do you, are there things that you're question. This is really different. I wonder what this one's about, because we haven't seen that a lot. How do you, and I would guess part of the gift of that is you have associates, right? You have other people doing this, but talk about that.
I think some of it is really navigating in the front end of, so I get to be a part of all we call them entry meetings of when we first meet with the stakeholders, whether it be a council or executive team or that kind of thing, to just really talk about what's happened here. Why did you make the phone call? Why are we here? And that sort of is the first barometer of where things are at, because sometimes it's a lot of laughter, we're ready for something different, but honestly, most of the time it's a lot of tears. Like, we've been in a place, we don't want to be here, and for some people, the church is like the last place they're gripping tightly to. We don't want change all the time, and it's like, how do we help people embrace a new world, to be honest? So,
yeah. Very interesting.
And a lot of churches are lamenting the fact that they're shrinking in numbers and really want to just grab onto what worked when it worked. And we try to help them say, it's a new landscape out there. And even if we did the same things, we wouldn't get the same result.
Right.
So
that brings me a question. So you've dealt with where's the temperature? I'll just say it that way, right? Yeah. Where's the readiness for that? What's the stuff you have to do, right? Do I have to do First Communion class or whatever? How do you help move into the new world? How do you help say, it isn't the same old thing? Is it education? Is it, experiments? What is it that you say, all right, are you ready to start thinking about that? How do we bring that? How do you make that turn? And what are the kind of practices you do?
Okay. So we ask the congregation to put together a team of people in the time of transition. And so we have kind of a process of kind of taking them through some different cultural history, kind of, we talk a lot about exemplar youth ministry and what the purpose of that is, and kind of getting a barometer for their congregation and their context. And we realize that if we're the only ones who are changing things, that it's all going to leave the minute we walk out the door. So we're trying to invest in a small group of people to kind of let them know where things are at, and to say it's okay to be sad about whatever, if it's the church or the shrinking numbers or whatever it might be. And but how do we take that and go forward? And so we're hoping to do some mind shifting in that time, and to give people that they would be the mouthpieces within the congregational context. So,
well, I love the fact that they probably have some credibility or beyond what you have.
Right.
I mean, you have a short-term credibility, but long-term. But also the sense that they're around. And it's their kids, grandkids, neighbors, whatever, that are going to be influenced by this. So they also have more of a, not only maybe a stakeholder in the church, but something inside them. We were talking about immunity to change, and there's a feeling level of that. And I know that there are times my mom has changed, not because she wants to or because she has knowledge, but because it's a grandkid.
Yes.
I'll learn to Skype because my grandkid doesn't live here.
Yeah.
Right? So that is enough to pull them over the edge, is that feeling part. But it also can be the thing that can be if it's not tended to, scared or whatever.
Well, and because we're coming in at a really vulnerable time, so there's an openness that probably not a lot of people get to see. And so we try to tend that vulnerability very gently, carefully, and constructively through the time that we're there.
All right. Since we're talking vulnerability, and since we're thinking about leading oneself, leading change is just darn hard work.
Yes.
I don't care if you know the people. I don't care if it's your grandma or the new grandma you just met. You watch these people struggling in that, and it's just hard work. How do you, some people are listening to this going, give me anything but that. Leading change in one congregation, and just when they're starting to get it, go to another one that's a mess, right? How do you go from one to the other and not become bitter at the church, just go be worn out, just your own burnout, or even see this as life-giving? Because I don't see you, I see you excited about what God's called you to do. And so you're doing something.
I think it's a specific call, honestly, that this thing.
Kind of like chaplaincy?
Yeah, because you
something?
Either like it or you don't. And we've had people who have come in and just said, I just can't do this turnover so fast. And sometimes it's honestly just getting used to leaving. Yeah. I think because, honestly, they get under your skin. The whole reason I do youth ministry is because I love young people. And when I leave, I always cry, and I always hope it's at a time that isn't real public. I try to do it privately, but sometimes it won't. My body won't have it, and it's going to cry publicly. And to know that that's part of it, but to be able, the way I kind of rationalize it for myself is to think I am with these people. I'm a part of their history. I'm here for this chapter in their life, if you will, and I'm going to tend to that chapter the best I can, and then I'm going to hand it off. Because I know somebody else, we jokingly say, you'd be sick of me anyway after a year or something. You'd have enough of my change and doing that. But honestly, and it's gotten to the point now where we sort of know when it's time. So you realize, you recognize that you're sitting back a little bit more, you're getting a little comfy. You've maybe even done the same event twice because you've circled around. So you kind of know that, all right, it's time to kind of start thinking about it. But it doesn't make it easier. It just makes you be true to the process. Like, I need to go. So tending to that and taking time off is really super important. We've actually had an associate who got physically ill because she was just pushing it too hard. And so there are things that will happen because that anxiety, that system stuff has to go somewhere. Yeah. So we want to make sure we're being as healthy as possible in the process. So
yeah, that's well, and I appreciate your you're talking about calling, and I think gifts. One of the things that we're working at in this course, but I think we work all our lives as Christian public leaders, is how attached to be and how detached to stay. And I think that's just in your face all the time. Yeah, as an interim. Yeah, right. You can't lead interim ministry. You can't lead change without attachment, without becoming connected to the people. Right. Even if it's an interim, but you can't have your self-image, your credibility as an institution, as an organization, or whatever, on somebody else's choices, right? Yeah. This is not the job for you if you really like to have that upfront presence. This really isn't a good job for you because you're always kind of playing zone. You step in when you need to and you step back when you need to, but if you really like to be up front, it's probably not a good place just because you're always kind of you're helping them figure out who they are, and so the sense of yourself is still there, but and so you're pushing gently and trying to figure out the best ways in light of the situation that you're in. So, all right, 2 other questions. Okay. One is, you're not the same leader you were when you started. No. And so I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about both what have you grown, how have you grown? Because one of the things that we're talking about is what does it mean to kind of be a lifelong leader and learn about yourself and learn about how you engage with other people and whatever. So that and talk about that in general, and then specifically maybe, what's an aha moment that either you're like, this was like I was on my game, and this you've really felt it, and you're like, this is why I do this, or this was the opposite. Don't do that again. Yes. We learn most by the highest and lowest points, right? So overall, but then maybe give us an example of a moment that was informing. Well, I think I've grown as a leader a ton more. I've stopped caring a ton about what people think in a sense of, not that I don't care, because I do really care, but I'm here for a purpose. God has me at this place for a purpose. And it's interesting that, so I actually look for who has God sent me here for. And there's always somebody, and it's never who it looks like. I always think it's a young person, right? Well, it's not always a young person. It's a mom. It's a grandma. It's and so
and obviously, hopefully, there's more than one person, but
Yeah.
but specifically, I could name each interim I've been in, and I could tell you who it was that God had me there for. So I'm trying to show up in a way that and be open.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think for me, that's the part that you think, is that going to happen when you do interim?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to hear that personal, relational stuff is still there in a particular way.
Yeah. And I want to reassure, like, I always reassure pastors because they're like, well, it's 6 months, you know, how they're not really going to attach. I said, you'd be amazed at what kids and parents tell you when you are, especially when they know you're going to be short term too, because they can just kind of throw it all out there.
Like going to camp or something.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
It's got a boundary. Yeah.
And it's got an end to it. And so I'm always amazed at how God shows up and how we work together, and then we kind of high five and hand off. In the best case scenarios, we hand off to somebody else, and we work together through a transition. So an example where I thought, this is going great, is just recently we have a congregation who has a Luther Sem student, and they were also thinking they wanted an interim. So they were trying to decide which way they wanted to go. And so they asked me to sit in on the interviews, which is a nice privilege to be able to do. But I said, my boundaries, I don't make any decisions. So we're sitting there, and we have one of our associates, and then we were doing 3 other interviews. And these are like, our associate has like 15 plus years of experience, and then we have people who have never had a job in the church. So I'm like, this is going to be weird. So anyway, just sitting there and listening to it, and our person was the last interview. And all I kept thinking, I couldn't even hear. It was just like yelling in my head, like, you need both of them. They need both of them.
Interesting.
So they don't just need an interim. They need that interim to teach the new person. And so I just kind of sat there, and I said, I just have to throw this out. I know I'm not a decision maker, but I just have to, what if you had both of them? What if you scaled back the hours on one and moved the hours on the other? Could we make it work financially? And it just sort of energized the space, and that's what they ended up doing. Wow. So I'm always humbled by those moments where we just kind of like lean into it and say, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But I can't tell you the times on a Wednesday night I would drive home and go, I just stink at this. I can't do it, Yeah. I mean, self-doubt creeps in pretty hastily. But usually it's because you're tired, Yeah. So
it's so easy in change to over or under function.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How
do you think about that in interim, either personally or with your associates?
We kind of try to name it, and I'm kind of bad at it, so I'm not I can recognize it, but I can't always see it when it's me. I can recognize, it's really easy always to recognize things in other people and not so much in yourself. So we try to just kind of build an awareness of it. So we do meet monthly with our associates and kind of talk about, first of all, our context and if there are any challenges, things. And then we usually have a topic. And so we do systems topics and things like that. And so we talk about over under functioning, self-differentiation, and all those sorts of systems things that we maybe haven't learned in our first. So our first language is children and youth ministry. Our second language is systems. So,
that's interesting. And I was just thinking, maybe because of your being interims, there's more intentionality, and there's actually more attention. Because I think many of us have been those, but don't have anybody to talk to.
Right.
Or say, I know this concept, but who might be my accountability person to say, are you over functioning? Are you under functioning? Especially if the system doesn't know systems language, right? Isn't fluent or doesn't even understand even concepts about how systems work.
Yeah, it's super important to have people you can talk to and people who know you super well that can just kind of say, I don't know, you need to kind of think about this, or have you thought of, Or I'll be the first one to go and say, I'm just stuck. I don't know what to do. It's not turning out the way I thought it was. I don't know what to do, and I'm too involved, and I want to rescue. And and so my colleagues saying, you know, okay, well, you need to set a time frame and a boundary or whatever it might be.
So your part of your navigating this is knowing enough about yourself, enough about systems, and then having a community that you can bring it to that isn't worrying about confidentiality, you know, that is within the parameters of that's what's healthy for you. And I think that's another thing when I think of leading in ministry. One of the ways I found, and I don't know about you prior to this, to self-navigate, I needed colleagues.
Yes.
Beyond just who I worked with. Because I had great colleagues for a long period of time. But there was the system. I was trying to figure out what's healthy, what's unhealthy in the system, and what's healthy and unhealthy with me.
Yeah.
And when they were in the system and we were alongside each other every day, it was harder to see. But colleagues outside of that, I mean, that's probably why you and I were taking a walk. I mean, you know, we were together in many of those kinds of network, kind of sought out those communities when we were in ministry that were, I knew they were beneficial. I didn't know all of why they were, but I wonder if this isn't one of those things that out of this we could all learn from, you know?
I would agree. And I would say, in addition to that, having your community outside of your context, too, is also helpful because you can start a spiral downward of complaining or being cynical or, you know, you kind of notice something that you don't like about somebody and that's all you can see. And so you kind of need to step back a little bit. But I was going to say about kind of, because we have these other lives outside of work and, I mean, my thought process behind this is like you can have crazy at home or you can have crazy at work, but you can't have crazy both places. Just you have to have somewhere that you can let down. And so for people who are going through a major life transition, again, this probably isn't a good time to be doing interim ministry. And so I wonder about that, even with interim pastors as they, you know, as they participate in that, what that's like for them also.
What's one thing that you think about that we haven't talked about? One or two things. I mean, are there some ideas that when you've been really navigating?
I've been thinking a lot about collaboration and what that means, and especially with systems and that. I'm just starting to think about that in a real structured way, but just like what makes that happen. And I think as churches, as a mainline denomination, we're going to have to really think creatively in the future. I mean, we need to now, but we even need to be thinking the future is coming faster. I don't know if that makes sense, but 11 years ago we said, you know, 10 years from now we're not going to know where youth ministry is at, and here we are 11 years later, and like, this is not where I thought. No. When I thought about it, this is not where I thought we would be. And so I mean, my lens is through the lens of collaboration. What does it mean to work together?
Well, and if we think human relationships, right? We are best in relationships, whether that be like spouse or family, really close ones, or good friends, you know, that are more loose. That when the more we know about who we are.
Yes.
And I think I live in an area where there were various sizes of congregations, and that had its own assets and baggage. But the more congregations had a sense of what I'm called to do, my place in this community, the gifts in that, so the more we were able to collaborate, because we weren't threatened.
Yes.
We weren't size or some fake criteria didn't creep in. Maybe it's maybe it's those things that make us have self-doubt or whatever. But as we more lived into, well, this is what we contribute to this. Would you like to partner? And for some congregations, there's an example. We do a Feed My Starving Children collaboration now. That's probably the best example of this. It is so flattened about size of congregation. All right. It's about this group of people don't have a staff person to do this, but there's some lay people and they can join with others, and it crosses lines that other things could never have crossed, theologically or size or staffing wise. But we want to feed people. We want to be a public presence in this community. We want to, and to watch that evolve. Mm-hmm. But it couldn't happen until people knew who they were.
Right, exactly. And we serve a relational God, and I think we're just better when we're together. I honestly think that. I mean, it can bring out our worst, of course.
Right.
So we have to kind of manage ourselves, because that's all we really have, and kind of manage our responses to those around us, and to take people for where they're at. Yeah. They're all children of God, and take what you want, and I'll steal it from AA and leave the rest. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
All right, one last question, and then if you've got anything, we'll close with that.
Okay.
So is there any place that you just really kind of worked hard with, kind of really set them up, and then they just crashed?
Not one comes to mind, but there have been several. I mean, there have been several where we've worked the process, we've done the process, we've worked with the people, and then they've gotten to a point and go, ugh. And it's usually about affordability. We can't afford to replace this position, or it was affordability, and yet they didn't have anybody to fill the position. Like, nobody was applying for the job for whatever reason and whatever time frame. And we work really hard at trying to make job descriptions attractive, and it just falls flat, and we leave and it's empty. And so that's really hard. It's really hard to do. We try to kind of really strategically put volunteers in place, but in a lot of places, volunteers are working full-time jobs too. It's only sustainable for a short period of time. So that does happen, and we try to own what we can out of it, and then try to let it go. So to do the best we can while we can. So
I think theologically and ideally, that's what we're all about. We steward a community for a period of time, and then we hand it over.
Yeah.
But practically and emotionally, I hate it.
I know.
I'm tied up in it, and I want it. And I think most of our timelines are longer, and we don't always get to see them. Right. Yours is shorter.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get some specific things, but they have to own it, right? Mm-hmm. They have to take something else. The baton has to be received.
Mm-hmm. And something can happen midstream, like the pastor takes a different call, or that kind of thing, or they're in interim pastoral leadership to begin with, and so there's just a lot of factors outside of our control,
that
and we
aren't
just
you can't
have to roll with it. Yeah. So it doesn't all get wrapped in a nice little
I
bow
know.
like I'd like it to,
but
love
it's
good.
Be like that.
Yes, me too. So
anything else?
No, it's just a fun ride. This ministry thing is a fun ride, and so I think stick with it. For those of you who are watching this from CPL, I just say stick with it. It's a great ride. You don't, from who I was when I first started to who I am now, is it's different, but it's the same. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be at this place in my career and in my call. So.
Well, and I think to what you said earlier, you knew the church was going to change. You had this instinct that a few people thought was crazy, or even was a worthwhile to do, but who would pay for it,
right?
Or who would invest in it? And we had no clue that how much the church was going to change.
Right.
And I think you're living into that and being bold in trying to listen to God and move into that, and then kind of almost getting equipped just a little bit before you needed to do it, right? Like it's just like build the bridge a little bit ahead of where you have to walk on it. And I'm thinking interim redevelopment, helping think through this is what almost every congregation now has as part of their work.
Absolutely.
And so your story is really fun to think what each of ours might be.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe there's a little seed planted that if we follow, we can see a couple rings down the bridge, but maybe not the whole thing. Yeah. And maybe we run into a Sue along the way.
Right.
To join.
Exactly. And, there were people we talk about that tenacity or that to stick with it. I honestly, when we first did it, and there were people who just were like, no, this isn't going to work. I actually stopped talking about what I wanted to do. To anybody who was super important to me, I was like, I'm not going to say what I'm doing because I can't. It was so close to me. I'm like, I can't take the heartbreak to be for them to look at me like, what are you doing? So, I don't know. So I just kind of turned the other way. That was a strategy to get through that.
It's part of that self-monitoring. It's not being arrogant, or it's not going there, not listening to anybody, but it's saying, what can my heart handle?
Right, exactly.
If I need to push this forward.
Yeah. So just throw that out there. But
thank you.
It's a fun ride.
Hope this has been helpful as we think about systems and specifically leading yourself within a larger system. So thanks.
Thanks. Have a good day.